On January 31, 1945, at Clark Air Base in Luzon, Philippines, Major Frank T. McCoy made a discovery that would fundamentally alter American understanding of Japanese aviation design philosophy. While photographing an intact Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber bearing tail number 76312, Major McCoy encountered engineering decisions that defied Western military conventions. The aircraft's fuselage gleamed in the tropical sun, its distinctive cylindrical shape spanning nearly 20 meters from nose to tail, justifying its Allied nickname. The bomber rested on its tricycle landing gear with wings extending 25 meters from tip to tail, showing no signs of battle damage. The 14-cylinder radial engines, each producing 1,500 horsepower, appeared completely intact. This was not a crashed aircraft salvaged from wreckage, but rather a complete operational bomber that had been abandoned by its crew during the American advance. Major McCoy, serving as commander of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific, had examined dozens of crashed Japanese aircraft across the Pacific Theater during his service. However, nothing in his previous experience had prepared him for what he discovered upon climbing inside the wings through the inspection panels. The fuel tanks within the Betty bomber were completely unprotected. There existed no self-sealing rubber compound, no armor plating, no fire suppression systems, and no protective coatings of any kind. Only thin aluminum skin measuring perhaps 2 millimeters thick separated thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel from enemy machine gun fire. This bomber, abandoned intact during the American liberation of Clark Field, would expose a design philosophy so fundamentally different from Western military thinking that it would require months for analysts to fully comprehend its implications. The mathematical analysis of this discovery would reshape American tactical doctrine and aircraft design considerations for the remainder of the war. Every assumption American pilots held regarding enemy capabilities, concerning the performance sacrifices Japanese engineers were willing to accept, and about the value Imperial forces placed on crew survival, would be systematically challenged by the evidence contained within this single pristine example of Japan's most important bomber design. The journey to this revelation had begun 4 years earlier, on December 8, 1941. That morning, as smoke continued rising from Pearl Harbor, 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers departed from bases on Formosa. Their designated target was Clark Field itself, which served as the primary American air base in the Philippines. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise. Arriving at 12:35 in the afternoon, the Japanese formation maintained an altitude of 20,000 feet, positioned beyond the effective reach of American anti-aircraft guns. 27 bombers from the initial wave delivered 636 bombs across Clark Field's runways and facilities. Moments later, Zero fighters swept in at treetop level, their machine guns destroying every aircraft that had survived the bombing run. Of 17 B-17 flying fortresses positioned on the ground, 12 were destroyed outright. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk fighter was reduced to burning wreckage. Within 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines had been effectively eliminated. Lieutenant James Harrington, one of the few surviving American pilots, observed from a bomb shelter as the Japanese formation withdrew northward. In his combat report, he noted how the enemy aircraft approached in perfect formation at high altitude, totally beyond American reach, followed by fighters dropping down to devastate ground targets. American forces were unable to get a single plane airborne, while the Betty bombers themselves departed untouched. The few American fighters that managed to become airborne arrived too late, finding only empty sky. The Japanese had demonstrated their bombers' exceptional range, striking from bases 460 miles away, a feat no American bomber could match at that stage of the war. The Betty's first year of combat would prove devastatingly effective. On December 10, 1941, just 2 days after the Clark Field raid, 26 G4M bombers joined with older G3M Nell bombers in attacking Force Z, a British naval task force built around the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The attack commenced at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon. Japanese bombers approached in coordinated waves, executing torpedo runs with precision that stunned British observers. The Betty bombers carried Type 91 aerial torpedoes, each weighing 840 kilograms with a 205-kilogram warhead. These torpedoes had been designed specifically for shallow water operations, running at depths that could strike ships even in coastal waters. The torpedo attacks focused on the two capital ships with devastating accuracy. HMS Prince of Wales, a battleship displacing 43,000 tons and representing the newest generation of British naval power, absorbed at least 6 torpedo hits along with damage from level bombers. The underwater explosions ripped massive holes in the ship's hull, and flooding overwhelmed damage control efforts, causing the battleship to list severely. HMS Repulse, a battle cruiser constructed during World War I but modernized in the 1930s, absorbed at least 4 torpedo hits while attempting to evade the attacking aircraft. The ship's anti-aircraft fire claimed several Japanese aircraft but could not prevent the coordinated torpedo runs from finding their targets. The cumulative damage proved fatal to both vessels. Both capital ships capsized and sank within hours of the attack. Prince of Wales went down at approximately 13:20 hours, with Repulse following at approximately 13:33 hours. The engagement claimed 841 British sailors' lives, with survivors rescued by escorting destroyers. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 hours from first contact to final sinking. For the first time in naval history, capital ships actively defending themselves had been sunk solely by air power while in the open sea. The G4M Betty bomber had achieved what naval theorists had debated for decades. British naval superiority in Asian waters had been shattered in 90 minutes. Across the Pacific theater through early 1942, American and Allied pilots encountered Betty bombers in every major engagement. The aircraft appeared to operate with impunity, striking targets at ranges that defied conventional understanding. Betty bombers attacked Darwin, Australia from bases 1,500 miles away, demonstrating reach that exceeded any Allied bomber's capability. They attacked Port Moresby from airfields across New Guinea's mountain ranges, maintaining pressure on Allied positions throughout the Southwest Pacific. They attacked Guadalcanal from Rabaul, a distance exceeding 600 miles, projecting Japanese air power across vast ocean expanses. The Betty's operational range provided Japanese forces with strategic flexibility that Allied commanders struggled to counter. American fighters based at forward positions lacked the range to intercept Betty bombers departing from distant bases. Allied airfields came under attack from Japanese bases that were themselves beyond Allied striking range. This asymmetry in bomber capability meant that Japanese forces could attack at will, while Allied forces struggled to retaliate effectively. This advantage persisted through the first 6 months of the war. Betty bombers participated in virtually every Japanese offensive operation across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, striking targets in the Philippines, Malaya, Netherlands East Indies, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. They supported naval operations throughout the theater and performed reconnaissance missions that exceeded the range of any Allied aircraft. The Betty became the symbol of Japanese air power's reach and effectiveness. The advantage described above depended entirely on limited Allied fighter opposition, when Betty formations could strike without interception, when they could approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, and when they could deliver weapons and depart before fighters arrived. The aircraft proved devastatingly effective. These conditions characterized operations during the first half of 1942, when Allied air strength remained limited and dispersed. However, by mid-1942, the tactical picture began to change, as American fighter strength increased, as Wildcats gave way to more capable Hellcats and Corsairs, as pilot training improved and tactical doctrine evolved. Betty crews began reporting disturbing losses. The shift became undeniable on August 8, 1942, when 23 G4M bombers from the 4th Air Group departed Rabaul to attack American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters intercepted the formation over Savo Island. In the engagement that followed, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers were shot down, with approximately 120 aviators perishing in what would become the single worst G4M loss during the entire campaign. Fighter pilots reported the same observation across every engagement. The Betty exploded into flames with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produced catastrophic results. The aircraft earned grim nicknames that spread rapidly through American squadrons, including Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, and Flying Zippo, all references to the Betty's terrifying tendency to burst into flames from battle damage. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrived at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17 flying F-4U Corsairs, the Betty's reputation had transformed completely. In his later report, Blackburn stated that the first time his squadron caught a Betty formation, they could scarcely believe how easily the aircraft went down. Hitting them anywhere along the fuselage or wings caused them to explode. American pilots actively hunted them, recognizing them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies. The true extent of the Betty's vulnerability and the engineering decisions that made such catastrophic losses inevitable would not be fully understood until American forces began capturing intact examples for detailed examination. The first significant intelligence breakthrough came in November 1942 when Australian forces overran Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the abandoned aircraft, Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific discovered Betty bombers with varying levels of damage. Initial examinations confirmed what pilots had reported. The fuel tanks had no protection whatsoever. Aeronautical engineers with the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific conducted the first detailed analysis. The wing access panels revealed fuel cells with no protective measures, thin aluminum construction, no rubber sealant layer, no protective coating, and no fire suppression systems. Multiple Betty bombers examined at Buna showed identical characteristics. This was not battle damage or field modification, but rather standard Japanese design. The implications were staggering. American bombers by 1942 universally featured self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress had incorporated them from the B-17C model onward. The B-24 Liberator had featured them from the XB-24B prototype. Even fighter aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 featured protected fuel systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks utilized layered rubber compound that swelled on contact with fuel when punctured by bullets or shell fragments, sealing holes and preventing fuel loss and fire. The technology added substantial weight to aircraft, but dramatically improved crew survival rates. American military doctrine considered this weight penalty essential and non-negotiable. Yet here was Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in thousands and operating across the entire Pacific theater, with fuel tanks that offered zero protection. The weight saved by eliminating self-sealing systems, armor plating, and fire suppression equipment was immediately apparent. However, the cost in crew lives was becoming equally obvious in loss statistics that mounted with every engagement. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 provided the most complete technical analysis. Major McCoy and his team spent 3 weeks dismantling and documenting every system. Their report, classified as secret and distributed to all Allied air forces, detailed specifications that explained both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. The G4M Model 1 specifications revealed an aircraft optimized ruthlessly for range and speed. The empty weight measured 6,741 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber of its size. Maximum takeoff weight reached 9,500 kilograms. Fuel capacity totaled 4,780 liters, distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing, positioned in the wing's center section where they were most vulnerable to combat damage. Top speed reached 428 kilometers per hour, approximately 265 miles per hour. Maximum range extended to 6,034 kilometers, exceeding 3,700 miles. Service ceiling reached 8,500 meters. The crew complement consisted of 7 members, including pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and 2 gunners. The fuel system design was particularly revealing. The 8 tanks were arranged in 4 groups of 2, positioned along the wing's longitudinal axis where the wing joined the fuselage. This placement maximized fuel capacity by utilizing the thickest portion of the wing structure, but it also positioned the tanks directly in the path of enemy fire during combat. Any attack from the side or below would inevitably strike fuel tanks. The aluminum construction provided no protection. The absence of self-sealing compounds meant that even small punctures would leak fuel continuously. American engineers calculated that the weight saved by eliminating protection systems exceeded 500 kilograms per aircraft. This weight savings translated directly into additional fuel capacity and extended range. However, the cost in vulnerability was equally calculable. Combat reports showed that Betty bombers hit anywhere in the wing area exploded with near certainty. The unprotected tanks created what engineers termed a critical failure point, a single system whose destruction guaranteed loss of the entire aircraft. These specifications told the story of design choices made in September 1937, when the Japanese Navy issued requirements that would define the G4M's entire existence. The requirements specified a top speed of 398 kilometers per hour, cruising altitude of 3,000 meters, and range of 4,722 kilometers unloaded, or 3,700 kilometers, carrying 800 kilograms of bombs or torpedoes. The requirements reflected Japanese naval strategy in the late 1930s. Japan's empire stretched across vast Pacific distances. Naval bases were separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The Navy needed bombers capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the range of carrier aircraft. Bombers that could operate from land bases to support naval operations across the entire theater. The Navy's requirements were not arbitrary. They were calculated based on the distances Japanese forces would need to cover in any future Pacific conflict. From Formosa to the Philippines represented 460 miles. From Rabaul to Guadalcanal measured 600 miles. From Japanese home islands to potential targets across the Pacific extended thousands of miles. The bomber that could meet these requirements would give Japan strategic reach that no other nation possessed. However, the requirements also reflected assumptions about future warfare that would prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese planners assumed that surprise and initiative would provide protection for long-range bombers. They assumed that enemy fighter opposition would be limited by range and numbers. They assumed that the war would be decided quickly before enemy industrial capacity could generate overwhelming force. Every assumption would prove false. The man tasked with achieving the seemingly impossible was Kuro Honjo, who led the Mitsubishi design team after taking over from Joji Hattori. Honjo had studied bomber design at Junkers in Germany during the early 1930s, absorbing European aeronautical engineering principles and manufacturing techniques before returning to Japan. He understood immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements would demand compromises that Western air forces would never accept. Honjo assembled a team of engineers at Mitsubishi's Nagoya facilities to tackle the design challenges. The team analyzed every aspect of bomber design, calculating weight budgets for every component and system. They studied existing bombers from multiple nations, identifying where weight could be reduced without compromising structural integrity. They experimented with new construction techniques and materials that might offer weight savings. The mathematics were brutally simple. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needed massive fuel capacity. Each liter of aviation fuel weighed approximately 0.8 kilograms. Therefore, 4,780 liters of fuel meant approximately 3,800 kilograms of fuel weight at full load. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needed minimal empty weight. Every kilogram added to the empty weight reduced either range or payload capacity. These two requirements existed in direct opposition. Fuel was heavy. Protection systems were heavy. Armor plating weighing hundreds of kilograms would be required to protect crew positions and vital systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks added substantial weight through the rubber compounds and additional structure required. Fire suppression systems added weight. Redundant safety measures added weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protective systems would have made achieving the required range mathematically impossible with the engine technology available in 1937. The discovery at Clark Air Base on January 31, 1945, provided comprehensive documentation of a design philosophy that prioritized operational capability over crew protection. The Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber represented Japanese strategic thinking in its purest form, an aircraft optimized for range and speed at the expense of survivability. This design approach gave Japanese forces significant advantages during the early stages of the Pacific War, enabling strikes at unprecedented distances. However, as Allied fighter strength increased and tactical conditions changed, the same design decisions that had enabled the Betty's remarkable range became fatal vulnerabilities. The detailed technical analysis conducted by Major McCoy and his team provided Allied forces with complete understanding of enemy capabilities and limitations, contributing to the development of more effective tactical responses for the remainder of the war.